I'm also on here with Jennifer. Jennifer works with me on um, the Maintenance and Reliability Institute. And a lot about what we do is coaching and training on manufacturing practices. Particularly, I like to circle around the maintenance reliability realm of it because I think that's the biggest opportunities for improvements onto it. But the purpose of this call is understanding a little bit about Industry 4.0. And the way I thought this call would go is I'm gonna as we go through, Jennifer's gonna manage the chat. And what I will do is go through it and we'll have a chance to do some Q&A at the end of it. But what I have learned on it. So for myself, I'm also a research into it, the scholarly portion of it, into the realm of manufacturing technology and how people are adapting to it. So when I look at it is I'm very interested in understanding some of the challenges that individuals have out there. And for me, this helps me in my research. So I'm not asking if you to call you out and ask for, but certainly if you're willing to share some of these things, these are the kind of things that I want to deep dive further into because I've got some experience into what we call Industry 4.0 harmonization. Because there's a disconnect between adding technology and bringing the people up into the organization. But I thought I'd start with just understanding what is 4.0? Why do we talk about that? And it really stands for the fact that if there's four, there was three others that occurred to it. Now, just to understand how these were come about, it starts with the Industrial Revolution, starting with one. And this happened around the 1800s. And it was during a time when there was a scarcity of labor and there was a need for a lot of work to be done, particularly in the European unions and other aspects around that circle around. Around that same time, we became interested in, or we found that uh, the energies of coal and water through the production of it. And it also led to the textile industry. And we also have these massive things where those swifters for grain and agriculture on it. Now, we wouldn't have another change in that for about another 100 plus years. And there's no real set timeline of when these industrial revolutions came, but we do know that we saw a different shift. And this shift had to do with the idea of automation. I think of the Ford Motor Company with Henry Ford and the bringing of parts of building things faster and understanding where those aspects come from. We also had technology advancements into extended transportation, these railroads, telegraphs, also lead to the telephones. And that would work well for us. But then around the 1960s, we walked into the digital age. And this digital age had to deal with the encompass of computers, circuit boards. And it just revolutionized how manufacturing automation would work. Now I'm talking about the third revolution. Now we're getting into the fourth revolution, which is Industrial 4.0. Now this happened around the 2000s. In fact, it wasn't turned until 2011 in Germany that we saw that there was a shift. And the shift was, as probably most of you have been around that shift, is the creation of cloud technology. We just through what have robotics, but we take it to a different level. This led to the idea of putting data into the cloud, running pulling this big data out, running algorithms, maximizing efficiencies. And a lot of it was to the defense is still occurring today. Now, I tell that story. Primarily the fact that as I worked on projects through some of these large corporations on trying to harmonize and bring about efficiencies, at the point is I didn't even know what Industrial 4.0 was. I just thought it was a novel term, and I was going to talk about it and write some blogs about it. But it wasn't until I started understanding the premises of it that I understand that, while the technologies are advancing and changing the pace of how we do it, there's a disconnect in how we incorporate a lot of automation and the people we bring about with it. Some of the things that resonated for me is I worked on several projects in my career. And one of the main ones that really resonated for me was when I was working on this project for a water bottling line. And the story goes, it's not a story, it's me telling the story, but this organization I worked for, we had 6 high-speed blow mold bottling lines throughout the US. And they all ran a little bit different, actually quite a bit different. And the way these lines were set up to be almost lights out self-sufficient. However, they had one staff person that was in charge of a high-speed bottling line. So they would bring the resin in, mold it, blow it, fill it with water, put a label on it, package, palletize, ready to ship. Primarily all automated. And the problem we were having was that the standards that we expected weren't being met, meaning that we were getting lots of breakdowns, inefficiencies, quality was suffering. And me and a team, we go in, we had basically set up we had the engineering group. They were looking at the processes of it. We had another group, they were looking at the machine efficiencies. And then I was looking at it from the people aspect of it. And we went in there and we fixed some stuff. Anything's broken, fix it, and it runs again. But it wasn't sustainable. And it wasn't until we'd gone in and done an analysis, like what is happening? Because every time we go and we look at this equipment, we see the operator, they're there clearing jams, clearing out any debris, cleaning up, running a lot of quality checks. But then we realized that one thing was different is that when that equipment was installed, one, it's had operators turnover at least 3 times. So that initial group that came in, got all this training, they weren't there. And this line had a lot of wear and tear. It's like any piece of equipment. And the same thing, we had an operator and we had a mechanic. Now, in both positions, like I said, they had turned over several times. But the other thing we found out is that we also had a list of what these operators and mechanics needed to do as far as maintenance and reliability on a day-to-day basis, month, same thing like that. You're changing your oil, changing the filters in your house, all that kind of stuff. It's a little more complicated, but they had that reality of it. Now, all the PMs are getting done. All the quality checks are getting done. But what we found out is what we were asking the operators to do it wasn't physically possible. We had asked them, it wasn't until I'd done an analysis on it saying, well, every 15 minutes you have to check the glue for the labels, and you have to dump the resin back in, and you have to do your quality checks, and change out film, other things like that. I learned to find out that we had scheduled them to 150% of their availability. And just to understand that means that everything that we were asked them to do, they couldn't do. But every time they were asked, we would say, well, most of the time we see them sitting around. And I see Ryan that, yeah, spaghetti man. Yeah, that's basically how that's how I did the analysis. And also understanding that actually myself trying to do these tasks realized it didn't work. But I guess the long story short of this is that we involved technology into it, and we didn't bring the people around to it. And what we ended up doing was having to increase headcounts because we wanted to get the reliability out there, increase the reliability. And to make the story a little bit shorter is that we actually, we had to invest another several $100,000 into it to get 3 more operators throughout the 3 shifts to continue running. Now, I tell you that story because it's not the first story I've had in these particular cases. But I tell you this because if you think about an automated water line, like if things happen, the worst thing you have is wet. It's just water. And you'd think that the reliability of it would be relatively strong, which it wasn't. And I guess several years would pass between them. I worked on several other projects from them, but I remember this story because it really introduced me to Industrial 4.0 and right sizing it and understanding where is manufacturing maturity levels at. That if you're going to invest high dollars into technology and automation, digitalization, all those fancy terms, you also have to bring the people up. So one of my research that I'm doing is understanding some of the risks associated with it and how to mitigate and right size it. So going back to a larger aspect of Industrial 4.0, there's several risks to take into account. First, you're talking about the economic risk. One, it's a big investment. And I've done these investments before. I remember working for one group. We had in the early 2000s, robotics, and they couldn't make them work. And ended up taking new robotics and put the labor back into it. But it was also a time and manner of the investments. So you've got people coming into it, working onto it. There's cost to that. But also, there could be a change in the business model. What you're putting into it, is it feasible? Is it lift and shift, or is it standalone? This is the only thing this thing can do. Certainly, there's competition, but then you start looking at the technical, the IT risks. This is back to the skill gaps onto it. Understanding what the dependencies on this automation, this Industry 4.0, the digitalization. How is it data handling, data security, things in that nature. There's also the thoughts at when you're incorporating new technology is, are you taking people's job away? And the job losses. Now, an interesting fact that may not be known is that in the last 25 years, 2000, the United States employs 4.5 million less people in the manufacturing industry. Now, Granted, this is due to automation, but manufacturing is still considered one of the core business models of industries. But you look at social risks and organizational structures and the leadership portion of it. There's also an investment into, if there's a disconnect between the technology and the people, well, how do you right size that? Well, there's a lot of training and also incorporating them into the decision-making process onto creating a human-centric approach to it to help mitigate and drive some of these changes. And then we struggle with lack of qualified personnel. I told you the story of this water bottle line and it turned over many times. This was not an ideal position for individuals. It was a starting block when they come into this factory. So they would move in, and as soon as I can't, they would meet their obligations for onboarding, and they'd get into their jobs. And then we're just spinning ourselves spinning that wheel. And for this was not. It was a primarily, it was a critical line, critical assets, and yet they were failing to invest into it. The other thing to think about Industrial 4.0, where it struggles, is it's highly categorized on the idea of efficiencies and output, where people take a second side. There's also the idea of, it's about efficiencies, there's also risk of pollution, and there's also a thought of overproducing. We talk about lean term spaghettis, there's also the Tim Wood idea of overproducing what we have. So I look at this and I try to take a shift onto it. Is that often when you invest heavily in something, there's a return, there's that skill gap of how to right size it with the people aspect of it. Now, I talked a lot about 4.0. In around 2021, the European Commission began the conversation about Industrial 5.0. 5.0 is meant to build on the skill gaps on what they see in sustainable action items to resiliency, which is all of what 4.0 was meant to right size. But the important thing that often gets left off is that human-centric approach. How are you bringing the people along with you? So I share this story, and I share this knowledge of how we've been evolving in manufacturing that evolves into how we live in society. But I'd be very interested to understand, what are some of the challenges that we see out there today? What are the challenges that you have out there? And for me, if you got something, put it in the chat, and then I'd be happy to talk about it. Now, Ryan had on here, he put in when I was talking about spaghetti mapping, which honestly, that's probably the best place to start with. If you're struggling with inefficiencies on it, to do that in spaghetti map. And for those that don't know, a spaghetti map is just, it can be as simple as taking a piece of paper and tracking the movements of the operators. And it's pretty interesting at the end of it if you do it for, I don't have to do it for like 4 hours, and you start seeing where these patterns are at. And in this particular case, the operator was either doing his quality checks or he's dropping resin back in. But we had many other problems or he was addressing mechanical concerns on the line, either a jam or other other things that draws him into the to work on. But I wanted to share this story, and I'm just asking out there if, and I don't want to take a lot of people's times. Before we started, we originally scheduled this for a 1 hour block. Jennifer and I, we talked about bringing it down to 30 minutes. But if you have any other questions, or I'm interested in finding out what kind of struggles you have out there. As I say, I'm doing some research onto it, and I'm really interested in finding out, my research draws me to what academics are saying, but then there's disconnect what's really happening, and I'm trying to right balance it. The culture of acceptance, yes, yeah, that is that's often a risk, because a lot of these decisions are made up in the corporate office, and they're not necessarily introduced correctly into the workforce. There's been some research that, in manufacturing, there's been a decrease in the unskilled labor that are avoiding going into these manufacturings because of the technology, and it causes a constant wheel turning approach that people don't want to go into it, and they're going into construction or other aspects of it, where these manufacturing sites are trying to fill these positions. I'll be interested to see if anyone's on this call is like, how many openings do you think your facility has at this point?
Yeah, so AW, like the question or the statement that I'm posing there, company that I'm working for, I would say the area is highly industrial, pulls a lot of technology, a lot of people. So I would say where that location sits from a pay scale perspective is probably middle of the road. Doesn't necessarily have more than maybe one automation controls engineer on a shift, maybe even just one on the day shift, working 12-hour shifts. So we'll call it day versus night. So the challenge that we're having is when we're looking at investing in the location for a new palletizer, let's just say. So I'll just blanket that it's a bottling operation. So for a new palletizing operation, we know that from a company standpoint, the investment makes sense to go robotic because of some of its capabilities that we may not see today, that a package may come tomorrow. But the challenge with it is if the culture isn't accepting of it from a maintenance perspective, and or the staffing, like right sizing, as you mentioned, we may just choose to go conventional palletizing because I can see a bad bearing. I can't see, let's just say, a bad servo cable on a harness for robotics, FANUC robot palletizing. So we're balancing this act of what do we have of capability versus what do we have of need versus what do we have that we can't see.
Yeah, that's a great point. That's a great point. And I've it's not an uncommon question or a dilemma. But I've also just, the technology is out there, right? It's out there. It can do all this, everything they say it can do. But the understanding, if do you have the capabilities in the workforce to maintain it? Now, granted, it'll qualify or run great for probably a year or something like that. But it sounds like you've got some experience on this, and as you know, the bearings wear. If it's robotics, you got a lot of moving parts that wear that um, um, may struggle with it. And these are the kind of things that really often ask the question is like, how much of investment do you make into it? So I really liked how you posed that question, or you posed your dilemma. So thank you.
Yeah, for sure.
All right. So we're at 30 minutes past the hour. Um, I you know I don't want to take anybody's more time, and if you have more interest and would like to talk about it more, you know, drop your email in the chat, or feel free to raise your hand, and we could set up another call, and I'd be happy to listen to what you're going through and kind of pose some of the research that's been going on out there as far as right sizing within Industrial 4.0. So I'm going to stop recording.